Welcome to episode 542 of the Grit2Greatness Endurance Podcast. We're your hosts, coaches Rich Soares and Lauren Brown, and we are on a mission to help endurance athletes train smarter, race stronger, and build the grit it takes to achieve greatness.
In this episode, we're breaking down one of the most misunderstood and most performance-limiting areas of endurance training, fueling. Triathletes and endurance athletes often train hard, follow the plan, and still underperform on race day. More often than not, this isn't a fitness issue, it's a fueling issue.
We'll talk through the most common fueling mistakes we see across triathlon, duathlon, and other endurance racing, why eating clean doesn't equal fueling well, and how underfueling quietly sabotages performance, refueling, and long-term durability using real race day examples from short course events to longer course endurance events. We'll show you how even small fueling gaps can create big performance spreads.
Yeah, so whether you're racing super sprint, Olympic, or long course, this episode will help you connect fueling decisions to actual performance outcomes, not just during the race, but in training and injury prevention too.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got a great discussion coming up, but before we get into that, we want to give a real quick shout out to some of our awesome athletes and coaches who raced last weekend. And Lauren, I'm going to kick it off by just giving you and Kevin Cole a huge shout out for Chattanooga 70.3. You crushed it. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an awesome race. And then also shout out to Coach April Spildy Racing Xterra National. She crushed it. She had a monster PR there. 40 minutes, right? 40-minute PR?
40-minute PR. Well, 40 minutes faster than predicted, actually.
40 minutes faster than predicted. She also had a significant PR, but holy smokes, she blew it out of the water. So shout out to Coach April. Super proud of her.
And want to give a huge shout out to Robina Waterman racing multisport nationals last weekend in Michigan. She raced the supersprint duathlon. She raced the aquathlon and the aquabike. So she's amazing. And this is coming back from a stroke.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's an amazing human.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's roll into what we're going to call 10 coaching tips for fueling for performance. We wanted to get really practical here. We're going to be talking about, and when we say nutrition too, we don't just hear, we're talking fueling a lot, but we're also going to be talking a little bit about hydration because that is just as much of a limiter in your daily nutrition as underfueling can be. So, Coach Lauren, I'll let you kick us off here.
All right. So jumping into coaching tip number 1, fueling starts before the session. Super important. First coaching tip. So it doesn't start during the workout. It starts before you hit the start button. I always think of it like this, where I'm like, do you check your gas tank like once you're already on the road, or do you like make sure ahead of time if you have like a long trip plan, do you make sure that you have gas in the tank?
That is a great analogy for that, right? I mean, from a physiological standpoint, like if you're starting out, if your gas tank is empty, if your muscle glycogen is already low when you start training, intensity and power output are going to drop faster than they would even for shorter sessions than they would if you were properly fueled from the beginning.
Correct, right? And that means you're not actually training the system you think you are, right? So that means underfueled workouts lead to underwhelming adaptations.
Absolutely, 100%. Coaching tip number 2, training fuel is performance fuel. This is a big one, folks. Athletes think fueling is just for race day. Unless you've done this sport, right? How would you know, right? So this is, an important thing for us to bring to the surface because not everybody understands this, but the science is clear. Adequate carbohydrate availability during training improves training quality and adaptation. Carbohydrates is what your body is using for fuel. And it's always using it. It's using it even more at higher intensities.
Yeah. So if you're consistently under fueling your training, you're asking your body to adapt with one hand tied behind your back. You fuel the work you want your body to absorb. And this, I want to share a recent experience that I had with under fueling for my workout. So I had a big training block. I definitely under fueled post training and did not properly fuel prior to my run. And it was literally like the hardest run that I felt like I was doing, even though my pace was slower than I wanted it to be. I wasn't running hills or anything like that, but because I did not properly fuel after my prior workout or before this one, just because of timing and I really didn't plan accordingly, it ended up being like a way harder workout for what should have been a pretty comfortable session.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I mean, and maybe this is just a concept where, we're just making some assumptions that everybody understands. So maybe it's a good thing just to pause on here for a minute, which is, and we'll probably talk about this, I know we're going to talk about this coming up, but after a workout, your muscles, like, this is where the gas tank is. The gas tank is your muscles and your liver where glycogen is stored. And you just have a limited supply. Even if you can completely fill your tank, you probably only have about 2,000, 2,500 grams, of carbohydrate in your system.
Right.
And that gets depleted over, through exercise.
Yep. Super important. So that's leading us right into the tip number 3, that carbohydrates are not optional. So it's really like, it's funny. I think about, and not to go totally off the rails here with the conversation, but I always think about when people are like, no, I want to just be keto and I can perform well. And even when you think about Vespa, right? Like, and we utilize fat more efficiently, but you still need to have carbs in your system because that is your preferred source of energy, right? And it's not like that's not an opinion. That's exercise physiology. And some of the fastest endurance athletes that we see out there running marathons, ultra marathons, they are relying on carbohydrate. And so I think that sometimes there's this like, well, I want to become fat adapted. And as if that means like I should be able to just function and optimize my training only off of fat.
Yeah. That's a really important point to be making here because it gets confusing pretty fast, right? Because you hear all of these success stories of low carb approaches. And in fact, metabolic flexibility is something that, and periodization is something that is a real concept out there. But just like you said, Coach Lauren, it is still not an option. You still are going to need carbohydrates to replace the glycogen that you're losing. And by the way, if you don't, the brain has a really great way of protecting itself because your brain needs carbohydrate to function. If it does not have glucose to function, you stop functioning. And which is why like you'll feel the bonk if you deplete yourself because the brain is going to say, you are going to sit down and save the rest of that carbohydrate for me. So it's okay to do periodized metabolic, flexibility through, teaching your body how to be more fat efficient, burning fat more efficiently, but you're still going to need glycogen. All right. Tip number 4, short races still punish poor fueling. So we hear this all the time. It's only a sprint. It's only a 30-minute run. But even a 20 or 30-minute race or run or bike, it relies heavily on stored carbohydrates. You are still going to, like, if you aren't fueled up, you are still going to deplete that. And that will affect, which we'll talk about later, recovery.
And I also think too, with like short races, when you think about high intensity interval training, when you talk about those things, you're like, your body wants carbs for that. It's more so when you think about how people discuss what energy or what fuel source you're using, you think long, slow, steady, fat fuel. high intensity carbohydrates. And these short races, that is like, you want carbs, you want to be able to, and it's like, you want to be able to have it readily available so you're performing as hard as you can. And poor pre-race fueling, this is where it shows up as pacing mistakes or late race fade, right? So you want to make sure that you are fueled properly beforehand so you can go hard the entire time. You don't want to go hard and then you have like 15 minutes left and you're like, womp, womp.
Womp womp.
Nothing left in the tank. So,
Yeah.
But going on to tip number 5. So, fueling by feel is too late. I would say this too with thirst. If you're thirsty, you're already going down the wrong path. So this is another big mistake that we see, that you're waiting until you feel low energy. And I've definitely done this before. I am super guilty of this. When I first started doing like longer runs and, I just was kind of finding my footing with longer distance, right? I would feel that like sugar drop where all of a sudden you're like a little shaky, and then you're trying to be like, do I have a gel? Can I get my energy back? And if you're waiting until you feel that, by the time you're like perceiving that fatigue, your glycogen availability, it's already compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's important to honestly plan ahead, plan fueling, don't react to it. I mean, you hear a lot of people, drink to thirst and eat to hunger. That, yeah, okay. Somebody has figured out how to be, somehow successful without that, and they're dispelling that as what's going to work for everybody, and it's simply not true. So your body just physiologically, if you were to do a metabolic test and do it under load, like while you're like a ramped running test or a ramped power test, you would see from the chart that your body is going to be burning more and more and more carbohydrate the higher the intensity that you're working. Shorter races are going to be at a higher intensity by default because you just can't sustain that high intensity for an Ironman. But either way, if you are not planning for it, you will get behind. So put it into a schedule, practice it, rehearse it. That's what those race rehearsals are for. All right, coaching tip number 6. Recovery fuel protects tomorrow's workout. Recovery nutrition isn't just about the workout that you finished. It's about the one that's coming next. It's about the race that's coming next, the workout that's coming tomorrow. True story. So one of the things I did a while back is I worked with Dr. Inigo San Milan at the CU Sports Medicine Center. And they basically did what is the equivalent of Doppler weather radar on my leg muscles to see what my current amount of glycogen storage is. It's like they take like an ultrasound, and the ultrasound brings back an image of stored glycogen, and it can actually tell muscle by muscle group by muscle group, how much stored glycogen is in that muscle compared to what its true capacity is.
That's so cool.
It's crazy. But but the timing of that recovery fuel should be immediately after that workout. That is when your body is most receptive to uptake and store that, glucose that you're drinking, eating, whatever, and store it as glycogen.
Yeah, that's where I jumped ahead earlier on talking about with my post-workout, where I was actually doing a race rehearsal and I wasn't hungry after it. And I was like, I am not hungry. I had to be at a party, and I waited 3 hours almost to eat after this workout, which is why my run the next day was totally trash. But it's like, even if you are not hungry, you have to eat. And that's where it's like, again, if you're listening to your body and you're only waiting until you feel it, you're missing the boat. And that happens with post-workout nutrition as well. So, and I know, Rich, you kind of alluded to this earlier, where the research shows that timely carbohydrate and protein intake improves glycogen resynthesis and muscle repair. Super important too, you guys. We're breaking down our muscle while we're doing our endurance sports, right? I mean, if you're running, cycling, those are definitely high demand on your muscular system as well. So if you miss recovery fueling consistently, your fatigue stacks quietly, and you don't want that to happen. So, all right, coaching tip number 7, underfueling increases injury risk. And I do want to share a quick, I keep on having these little quick asides, but I'm going to share it. So when I was dealing with issues with my knee, I went to the orthopedist and I ended up having an MRI, and we were reviewing the things that were going on, right? So I had like quad tendonitis, I had IT band syndrome, my meniscus is a little angry, like whatever the things were going on. And he pulled me into the office and was like, started going over REDS with me, which is, for anybody, relative energy deficiency in sports, for anyone who's not familiar with it, or, it's just where you're not fueling properly. And I was like, I got like defensive at first because like, I know I'm fueling and I know this is not a fueling problem. I know I'm eating enough. But from a doctor's standpoint, he wanted to address my fueling because he wanted to make sure that that wasn't what was contributing to why I was having issues with my knees and with any like breakdown or inflammation that was going on. So I did.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And it took me a little bit by surprise, and I know it makes sense, but I almost felt like, no, that's not what's going on. But now I really have, since that appointment, been a lot more like, okay, let me try to eat a little bit more food and make sure it's timely with my workouts, and also just getting my calorie intake up, because it can be hard, but you have to do it. So again, like this is one that I'm taking seriously as an athlete. We take seriously as coaches, because chronic low energy availability, it impacts your hormones, your bone health, and tissue repair. So super, super important. And for me, I was like, if that's not going to get me to make sure my nutrition is on point, like I don't know what is, because I don't know any endurance athlete or any person listening to this who does not want to increase their risk of injury.
When I have my one-on-ones with my athletes, one of the things that coaches will do when they're talking to an athlete is they're going to try to gauge, we're always kind of looking for certain, signs, right? If the athlete appears tired or, always sore or always managing something, or maybe even feeling kind of just, grumpy, sometimes that can be a sign that you need to examine your fueling, right? That it does raise a question. How is the fueling? Mm-hmm. What is causing you to always feel tired, always feel sore, always be managing something, or just in fact grumpy because, you're hungry, you're hangry.
We've all been there.
All right. Coaching tip number 8, consistency beats perfection. I love this. Progress over perfection. Always. Athletes love complicating fuel plans, but consistency matters more than complexity. Keep it simple.
Yep. So just a simple fueling strategy that you execute every time will outperform a perfect plan you don't follow. And that's like, I love that line, right? Where it's like, you could have the best strategy in the world. If you're not going to do it, I say that when people ask me, this isn't triathlon related, this is just general fitness. But when people ask me like, what's the best type of cardio? I'm like, whatever the cardio is, you're going to show up for, right? If it's something that you're going to consistently do it. If you love Zumba, do Zumba. If you love, like rowing, row. But same thing with your fueling strategy. It has to be something that you're going to follow, that is going to physiologically reward you, right? And physiology rewards predictability. And it's also a great way to make sure that you know what's going to happen on race day. If you're somebody who's always changing it up, it's like you want to know what works for your body and your gut. Sure.
Absolutely.
All right. On to coaching tip number 9. Race day. Oh, this is a perfect segue. Race day fueling should feel boring. It should feel, if it feels exciting, it's probably risky. The gut adapts to what you practice. I know it's like, look and see what's on course. I use more in-gels on race day. I know they're going to be on course on race day. So like, use what is going to be out there. It shouldn't be new and exciting.
I love that. And this is where the practice really makes perfect. And when we say practice your fueling, we mean practice your fueling under the intensity that you will be racing. It is one thing to be going out there for a leisurely ride and, trying to get down the, 2 or 3 gels an hour, or whatever it is that your nutrition, your body demands. But if you have not practiced, this is not something your body can adapt to like overnight. This isn't something that you like cram for the test. This is something that you really want to rehearse and do it under intensity. Like I said, like it feels way different to be trying to put down carbohydrate and fuel when you're in that zone 3, zone 4 area versus that zone 2 level of intensity. All right, let's bring it home with coaching tip number 10. Performance phases require performance fueling. This is our final coaching tip here. Fueling has to match the phase you're in. This is part of that periodization we were talking about or alluding to earlier. Performance-focused training blocks require adequate energy availability. So whether it's a one day, like you're going to probably double your carbohydrates for a big day. Mm-hmm. If it's a big training week or a training camp, you might be increasing.
Yeah. And I always say, like, if I ever have an athlete who is thinking about weight loss goals while they're racing, I'm like, that's not the time, right? In season is your body's going to land wherever it's going to land. And the training that you're doing is naturally going to probably make things shift. But if you are doing endurance sports, your goal should be, for most of us, I don't want to say for everyone, but it should be for most of us, it's performance, and it's performing. And when I say performance, I don't mean, oh, we're going to podium and that's what the goal is. The goal is that you want to be able to get through a race feeling as strong and as good as possible, because I really don't think anybody enters a race thinking like, I hope I feel like really bad the whole time, right? You want to feel good. So, but trying to aggressively restrict calories during peak training and racing, that often backfires. So fuel for performance first. And like I said, everything else will follow suit however it's supposed to be.
If there's one thing we want you all to hear, fueling isn't about just simply eating more. It's about fueling with intention.
Yes, aligned to your training, your racing, and your long-term durability.
And because we want you to succeed, that is exactly why we built our fueling audit and checklist. So go to the Grit2Greatness website, go to our free guide page, send us your email, and we'll send you the fueling audit and checklist. It'll give you a way to just see and score yourself and see how you're doing and give you a checklist for the future.
I love that. All right. You ready for the fun segment?
Oh my gosh, let's go for it.
All right.
What's today's segment called?
It is Tales from the Bonk. All right. So, everyone, gather around, pull up a folding chair, grab a gel, because today we are doing something sacred, something so deeply, profoundly humbling that most of us would rather get a root canal in transition than talk about it out loud. That is a bold statement, right, you guys? So today we're telling tales from the bonk. We just spent a whole episode trying to save us and you from this exact thing, that magical moment where your legs file for divorce, your watch starts beeping accusations at you, and your brain attempts the math. It is no longer qualified to perform. So every single one of us has a bonk story, and almost none of us wants to tell it. Our worst DNF, sure. Our ugliest transition, fine. Let's laugh. But the bonk is personal. The bonk knows things about us. So it's confession time. I want your bonk story, the real one. What race, what mile, and the exact moment you knew the wheels were coming off. Rich, do you want to share first?
I would be glad to. One of the things you've probably noticed about me, Coach Lauren, is that I am very, very data driven when it comes to nutrition plans. You've seen my nutrition calculator, and the burn down chart. There is a reason that came into existence, and it was really to help solve my own problem. This is something that has always, from my very first 70.3 to my last Ironman, has been something that I have had to manage. And I would probably say my very worst bonk was Boulder, Ironman Boulder 2014. And, I knew I was playing catch up most of the day, and I was trying some new, honestly, I had really kind of gone through this kind of fat adaptive cycle with a nutritionist, and one that I kind of thought, had it pretty dialed in for events of this type. And this is before I became a coach, before I really knew what I was doing. And I knew I was in trouble when I was on mile 6 of the marathon, and it felt like I got hit over the back of the head with a frying pan. I could not run anymore. And within a mile, I was vomiting. I walked the next 19 miles of that marathon.
Oh.
I got up to a little bit of a jog, going past the crowd, going past my family a couple of times, and I finally was able to run the last mile. And I, because short-term experience. At that time, I was able to get some nutrition in. I was trying to come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, a 19-mile walk.
Holy smokes. That is brutal.
And I still beat my brother.
Oh my God, Rich, that was great.
Sorry, Roger.
Oh my God, that was my favorite part of that story. But holy smokes, 19 miles walking and so I can't top that, but that totally explains your spreadsheet and everything that went into it, because that's borderline traumatic to go through that.
Yeah.
So I have nowhere near matching that, but I'm going to go with a different type of bonk, because you brought up hydration earlier on. And I used to be somebody that was like, I don't need to worry about taking aid stations. I've got my run bottle. I've got what I need. And this was just a half marathon, so it wasn't a super long race, but I forgot all my little cooler with my morning nutrition at work. And I left straight from work to drive down to Virginia. And I got to the hotel and I was like, where's all my stuff? I'm like, I guess I left it in the car. I'll get it in the morning. And I didn't have it. So I had no electrolytes. I had no food. I didn't have anything with me. I had a little bit of food that I bought at the store. So I had a bagel, but I got to the course and I'm like, because it was a half marathon, there was like, I couldn't find any electrolytes. And so I ran that race without any electrolytes. It wasn't super hot, but that doesn't matter because I'm a sweaty person and a salty sweater. That I probably had about 2 miles left. And I've never felt anything like it in my calves in my life. And I hope I never feel it, where it felt like there was like an alien trying to come out of my leg with how the rippling was in my leg. And it kept feeling like my foot was just like I didn't feel my foot. And I was like, dang it. I was on such a good pace where I knew I was super close to getting a PR. And I was like, come hell or high water, Lauren, don't slow down. And it was every now and then I felt like my leg was giving out. And I ended up PRing that race somehow. But as soon as I finished across the finish line, I couldn't walk and I fell and I couldn't get up. And thank goodness this wonderful, wonderful woman had pickles and pickle juice. And so she gave me pickles. There was a girl that walked by that had Noon in a cup that she got from one of the vendors, I guess, or whoever was there. And she was like, are you okay? Do you want my Noon? I was like, I would love your Noon. I don't care if you drink out of that thing. I cannot stand up and walk right now. So not a fueling, but a hydration. That was my worst hydration. We'll call it a bonk ever, where I was like, I don't know if I could drive. I don't even know if I can get to my car. And I was alone. So that was a good learning curve of make sure you've got your electrolytes, take aid at the aid stations. Don't just think you're going to wing it and be okay, because you probably won't.
I love the desperation, like how far desperation will take you.
Terrible.
I used to train with a neighbor who's an ultra runner, and I once paced her over on the Leadville 100, and she talked about a story where she was racing And she was so depleted that she found an opened ketchup packet on the ground and ate from it.
We'll do anything. Oh my God, that's so funny. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah, I mean, well, I drink a stranger's noon, so I guess that's kind of gross too after a race. So whatever.
Yeah. I mean, anyway, great discussion. That was fun.
Yes. All right. So here's your homework for our listeners, right? Because misery loves company. Head over to our G2G Endurance Facebook page and jump into the comments on today's episode post and confess your bomb. Bonus points if you tag a friend who once told you you don't need a gel for a sprint. It's only 20 minutes. Those brave enough to confess will get a Grit to Greatness shout out on next week's show. And here's the real reason coaches gave a whole episode to fueling, so that Tales from the Bunk can someday be a history segment instead of a weekly diary entry. So train hard, eat well, and for the love of all that is holy, grab it at this aid station, not the next one.
I love that. That is awesome. And all of this, and we've already mentioned it, right? All of this discussion around nutrition, we are lovers of Vespa Power. Vespa Power Endurance helps you tap into clean, steady energy so that you can stay strong, focused, and in the zone longer. Now, we've been talking about carbohydrate. You're still going to need carbohydrate. Vespa is not a carbohydrate. It is a metabolic catalyst that helps you shift from using that much needed sugar and glycogen and allows you to use more fat so that the current glycogen and sugar that you have stored lasts you a little bit longer. Kind of helps your fuel mileage, if you will. So less sugar, higher performance, faster recovery. Check out Vespa Power products. We've got the link here in the show notes, vespapower.com. There is a coupon, a discount code here in the show notes, G2G Vespa 15 will get you 15% off of anything in your cart. There are so many goodies here, right? Share this episode with somebody else. Share your story. Download our downloadable. Go to the website, Grit2Greatnessendurance.com. Contact us. We will send you the download. And folks, thanks for spending time with us today on the Grit to Greatness Endurance Podcast. If you've enjoyed the episode, please follow us and leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or both. It helps us reach more athletes just like you. Stay gritty, train smart, and keep chasing greatness.